At 10:26 a.m. local time, above the Sea of Azov, a Ukrainian Luty drone was hurtling at full speed towards a target Russia absolutely could not afford to lose. This Russian aircraft, an IL-38N, was Russia's sole platform in the Black Sea capable of detecting their new weapon. Satellite images, taken 6 hours prior, already showed ground crews removing its engine cowlings. The IL-38N needed to be ready for flight by 1 p.m. This was their only chance to shoot it down before it took off. Time was already running out. Welcome to Border Watch Daily, where we explore the most intense narratives of modern conflicts. What you're about to discover is how a single, seemingly vulnerable drone managed to outwit Russia's most advanced defense systems, revealing unexpected vulnerabilities and surprising ingenuity. At 10:31 a.m., the Luty crossed the Ukrainian coastline, descending to 50 meters above the gray winter waters. Ahead lay 280 kilometers of open sea. At a speed of 220 kilometers per hour, the crossing would take 76 minutes. 76 minutes of silence. The drone's composite airframe scattered radar energy in all directions except towards Russian stations, as if you were throwing a handful of glitter instead of a mirror to see yourself. At 50 meters altitude, the Earth's curvature did the rest. Radar waves travel in straight lines, but the Earth doesn't cooperate. The drone flew below the horizon, invisible to every Russian radar within a 200-kilometer radius. For over an hour, it might as well not have existed. Everything seemed like a routine operation until it reached land again. At 11:47 a.m., the drone reached land east of Perovsko-Atars. 70 kilometers remained to the target, with 19 minutes until impact. The invisibility phase was over. Now, it was Russia's turn to react. 3 seconds after crossing the coastline, the silence was broken. Observe this cell tower near the village of Stuterovskaya. You'll see what looks like standard telecommunications equipment. A gray cylinder bolted to the frame, roughly the size of a coffee thermos. Inside are 4 omnidirectional microphones and a processor running classification algorithms. Ingenious. But ingenuity only works if the enemy is unaware of it. This was Russia's answer to stealth drones. You can't see what flies below the radar horizon, but you can hear it. The Luty's turbojet cared little for stealth. Its engine produced 85 decibels at 100 meters, the equivalent of a motorcycle at full throttle on a highway. The compressor blades created a high-pitched whine between 4,000 and 8,000 hertz, while combustion added a deeper rumble between 200 and 500 hertz. In the cold December air, the sound carried far, as dense air transmits acoustic energy more efficiently than warm air. The microphone picked up the first traces at 11:47 a.m. The signal strength was 53 decibels, roughly the volume of your office colleague swearing no one heard them fart in the break room. Faint, yes, but well above the 35 decibels of ambient noise on a rural Russian winter morning. Russia had built microphones sensitive enough to catch an accounting Steve in the act. The algorithm had found its needle in a haystack. The processor performed a fast Fourier transform, breaking down the incoming sound into its component frequencies, much like separating a chord into individual notes. The algorithm then compared the spectral fingerprint to its database. That high-pitched whine from compressor blades, that combustion rumble, those specific ratios that distinguish turbojets from propellers. The classification returned in 3 seconds. Hostile drone, 87% confidence, bearing 245 degrees. A single microphone provides a direction, but not a distance. The drone could be 2 kilometers or 10 kilometers away. It was like knowing someone was shouting from the east without knowing if they were in your backyard or down the street. But Russia has over 200 of these sensors along the Krasnodar coast, spaced 3 to 5 kilometers apart. Within 8 seconds, 3 more microphones reported, indicating bearings of 248 degrees, 251 degrees, and 243 degrees. The fusion algorithm calculated the intersection of these lines, simple trigonometry, but executed thousands of times per second. A track appeared, hostile drone, position accurate to 50 meters, updated every 2 to 3 seconds. The Ludi had no idea, and even if it had, it wouldn't have cared. The drone carried no acoustic alert system, as such a device doesn't exist for an aircraft of its size. The Skynote S flight computer showed all systems normal, target coordinates locked. The tracking of its every move might as well have been by a ghost already unaware it was dead. 67 kilometers remained to the target, with 18 minutes until impact. Still enough time, if nothing else went wrong. The microphones could track the Ludi across Krasnodar, but they couldn't shoot it down. For that, Russia needed a different weapon. At 11:52 a.m., 5 minutes after the microphones detected the drone, the tracking data reached a Tor M2 battery in Strovskia, located 18 kilometers southeast of the drone's position, and well within the system's range. The Tor M2 is Russia's short-range answer to this type of threat. 8 missiles on a tracked chassis, a radar capable of tracking 48 objects simultaneously. On paper, the Ludi was already doomed. The battery commander had precise coordinates from the acoustic network. He pointed his fire control radar in the general direction and searched for the target. Nothing. He had position data accurate to 50 meters. His radar could track a bird at 25 kilometers, but the screen showed only an empty sky. The problem lay in the elevation angle. The Tor's fire control radar must point slightly upwards for its targets, at least 5 degrees above the horizon. Any lower and ground reflections would overwhelm the return. Radar waves bounce off terrain, creating false echoes that the processor cannot distinguish from real targets. The system was designed for aircraft and helicopters, threats that fly at hundreds of meters. No one had anticipated a drone at 30 meters altitude. At 18 kilometers, a target flying at 30 meters is at an elevation angle of 1 degrees, practically on the horizon. The radar was looking straight into ground clutter, and the drone was drowned in it. The commander did the math. For his radar to see a target at 30 meters altitude, that target needed to be within 2 kilometers. At 180 kilometers per hour, the Ludi would traverse that window in 24 seconds. He would have only one chance if the drone flew directly towards his position. But it wasn't. The Ludi was heading northeast, passing by him rather than approaching. The commander monitored the acoustic data as it updated. Range 16 kilometers, then 15. The drone was getting closer, but the geometry wasn't improving. The track would pass 4 kilometers north of his position, never entering the narrow window where his radar could acquire it. By 11:55 a.m., the acoustic network reported it at 12 kilometers, streaking northeast at 175 kilometers per hour. The Tor's radar still showed nothing but frozen farmland and interference patterns. At 11:57 a.m., the track had entirely passed its engagement envelope. The range was increasing. The drone was now moving away. It had literally flown under the radar. 47 kilometers remained to the target, with 12 minutes until impact. The Ludi had evaded the acoustic network thanks to terrain masking, and the Tor thanks to geometry and physics. But something else had been hunting it since before it crossed the coast. Something that cared neither for elevation angles nor radar horizons. 40 kilometers to the west, this weapon was already airborne. The Jaran 2 had been launched from a position near Timuk at 10:50 a.m., just 3 minutes after the Ludi took off. Russian standing orders kept armed interceptors on orbit whenever a satellite alert signaled Ukrainian launch activity. A Ludi departing a Zaporizhia runway had triggered the alert, so the Jaran 2 was in the air even before the Ukrainian drone reached the coast. But this was no ordinary Jaran 2. If you look here at the top of the fuselage, where the delta wing meets the engine cowling, you'll notice something unusual for an attack drone. A 9K-333 Verba missile in a modified launch tube, held by aluminum brackets, bolted to the airframe. Russia had turned a single-use attack drone into an airborne SAM platform. It was the drone equivalent of strapping a shotgun to a lawnmower. Ugly, improvised, and just crazy enough to work. The Jaran 2 is an Iranian design, built under Russian license. The Shahed 136 with Cyrillic markings. Delta wing, pusher propeller, 50, horsepower, 4-cylinder piston engine, cruise speed of 185 kilometers per hour, normal endurance of over 4 hours. The armed variant is different. The Verba system adds 12 kilograms, this extra weight reducing its loiter time to 90 minutes. If you look at the mounting hardware, you'll see 2 black boxes near the launch tube. These are servo motors. One controls the protective cover over the missile's seeker. The other operates the firing trigger. Cables run into the fuselage, secured to the skin. This means the operator doesn't fire with a simple button press. They send commands via a mesh network, a radio system where signals hop between relay drones and ground stations, each node passing data to the next until it reaches the drone. First command, open cover. Second, align drone. Third, fire. By 11:47 a.m., when the Ludi made landfall, it had been airborne for approximately 60 minutes. It had 30 minutes of fuel remaining, a single missile, and a target hiding in a 400-meter acoustic blur. The Jaran 2 received the acoustic tracking data. Hostile drone, bearing 095, range 38 kilometers, heading northeast. The operator adjusted his course east, descending to 600 meters, and began his search. 47 kilometers remained to the target, with 15 minutes of fuel. The countdown had begun for both sides. But finding a drone at 30 meters altitude in an irrigation canal is not comparable to detecting an aircraft in clear sky. The Verba seeker needs contrast, a hot target against a cold background. In the sky, a 400-degree exhaust easily contrasts with negative 15 degrees Celsius air, allowing easy acquisition at 6 kilometers. Against the ground, everything changes. Frozen farmland at negative 3 degrees Celsius, plowed fields warming to plus 5 degrees Celsius. A complex thermal tapestry that the seeker's 3 channels must somehow distinguish from the target. The operator searched for 6 minutes. His camera showed frozen fields, bare trees, the dark line of a canal. The acoustic network indicated a target was somewhere within a 400-meter ellipse, but somewhere does not constitute a firing solution. 12 minutes of fuel remained. The canal ended further ahead. The Ludi would have to gain altitude. When it climbed, everything would change. By 11:59 a.m., the canal ended. Open farmland rose to the northeast. No more terrain for cover. The Ludi's profile demanded minimal exposure. Stay low, stay fast, never silhouette against the sky for more than a few seconds. The Skynode S identified farm buildings 2 kilometers ahead. Metal roofs, thermal clutter. If the drone reached those buildings before climbing, the background might mask its signature. It almost worked. At 12:07 p.m., a ridgeline blocked the path. No bypass. The drone pulled up to 80 meters, crested the ridge, and dove down the other side. 3 seconds. The exhaust silhouetted against a gray December sky. The Geron 2's camera captured it perfectly. A bright, fast-moving dot, unmistakably hot. The operator's hands moved swiftly. First command, open, launch, cover. The servo motor engaged. The protective cap swung aside. The 3-channel seeker began scanning. Second command, alignment. The Geron 2 banked, pointing its axis towards the target's bearing. The seeker immediately found the exhaust. Strong ultraviolet, strong infrared, strong mid-infrared. All 3 matched an engine profile. Not a flare, not a thermal reflection. A real target. Third command, fire. The solid propellant motor ignited. 20 Gs of thrust. The Geron 2 shuddered as the missile left the airframe. The operator fought to stabilize the aircraft as it sped towards its target. Range at launch was 7 kilometers. The closing rate was 850 meters per second. Intercept time, 11 seconds, perhaps less, thanks to a peculiar characteristic. The Verba missile uses proportional navigation. It doesn't just chase the target. It flies towards where the target times will be, constantly adjusting its angle to cut off any escape. Simple geometry, but extremely difficult to counter without countermeasures. The Ludi had none. No chaff, no flares, no jamming. The drone was designed for range and payload, not survivability, but it possessed something else. The moment the Ludi crested the ridge, the Skynode S executed the next waypoint. Nose down, throttle idle, diving towards the terrain on the other side, a stream bed that would provide acoustic shadow for the next leg. The drone wasn't evading the missile. It was unaware of its existence. This was pre-programmed terrain masking. A coincidence, but a very effective one. The seeker maintained its lock. All 3 channels tracked the descending exhaust. The guidance commanded a dive to align, but the missile was now hurtling towards the ground at 600 meters per second. The magnetic proximity fuse is designed to detonate near metallic structures. However, this sensitivity creates problems near terrain, frozen soil, buried pipes, iron-rich ground. All these generate weak magnetic signatures that the fuse had to distinguish from valid targets. 9 seconds after launch, the missile was at 30 meters, still descending. The seekers were still locked. 11 seconds later, the missile was at 18 meters, the Ludi at 25 meters, pulling out of its dive. The fuse triggered, not on the drone, but on an abandoned tractor in the stream bed. The 5-kilogram warhead exploded on the frozen earth. Fragments scattered across the field. The Ludi, 40 meters further and climbing fast, flinched from the shockwave. No damage. The operator observed the explosion. Wrong position, wrong angle, no debris trail. Failure. His single missile. 9 minutes of fuel remained. The target was gone. In Krasnodar, the operator stared at his screen. 11 months of intercepts. And this was his first failure. Someone would demand an explanation. He had none. He chose pursuit. Full throttle. The camera followed. The Geran, too, couldn't catch the Ludi. It was 35 kilometers per hour too slow. But it could relay its position to base defense. 26 kilometers from the target, the Ludi had survived acoustic detection thanks to terrain masking, and the Verba missile by luck and programming. Ahead lay the most difficult part, finding a specific aircraft among dozens, with an AI that had never seen this target from this angle. The Ludi had to find the IL-38N, ignore the standard IL-38, parked 80 meters away, and strike precisely enough for the airburst warhead to destroy the sensor section, not just damage the airframe. If you look at the two aircraft, you'll understand why this is difficult. Both have 4 turboprops, high wings, and long, similarly gray fuselages. At 35 meters altitude and an oblique angle, they are almost identical. The difference is on the top of the forward fuselage. The IL-38N carries the NV9 ELINT pod, a square structure approximately 2 meters long, mounted on external supports above the cockpit. ELINT stands for Electronic Intelligence. The pod contains passive receivers that intercept radar and radio emissions, classifying signals by frequency, pulse pattern, and origin. The standard IL-38 is not equipped with this. This pod marked the target. Destroying the wrong aircraft would cost Russia an $8 million training plane. Destroying the right one would cost it its sole Black Sea submarine hunter. The neural network running on the Skynote S had been trained specifically for this discrimination. Here's how it works. Ukrainian intelligence services gathered thousands of images, satellite photos, reconnaissance footage, publicly available images, commercial aviation photographs. Each image was labeled. This is an IL-38N. This is a standard IL-38. This is something else. The algorithm learned patterns, not explicit rules, but patterns. It learned that IL-38N aircraft feature a rectangular shape above the cockpit that standard variants do not. It learned the aspect ratio of this shape, the shadow it casts under different sun angles, its position relative to the cockpit windows. During flight, the camera transmits 30 frames per second to the processor. Each frame undergoes feature extraction. The algorithm identifies edges, shapes, shadows, and geometric relationships. It first searches for 4-engine aircraft, then high wings, then a distinctive nose profile. Next, it looks for the ELINT pod. The system draws a bounding box around candidate shapes, measuring dimensions pixel by pixel. It compares aspect ratios with its training data. It weights confidence based on how closely the observation matches known examples. Final classification: IL-38N. Overall confidence: 94%. At 12:15 p.m. and 8 seconds, the satellite link transmitted an encrypted burst. Strike authorized. 14 seconds remained until impact. But at 12:15 p.m. and 12 seconds, the navigation computer detected an obstacle absent from its reference images. A ground generator next to the target, whose exhaust stack extended 4 meters into the approach corridor. The satellite photos were 18 hours old. Someone had moved the equipment. The AI recalculated. 3 degrees right, steeper descent. This correction cost 12 meters of accuracy. At 12:15 p.m. and 19 seconds, the IL-38 filled the camera frame. The NV9 pod was clearly visible. Classification confidence: 97%. At 12:15 p.m. and 21 seconds, The radar altimeter measured 1 meters above a surface. That surface was the upper fuselage of the IL-38N. The warhead, located behind the Luty's fiberglass nose cone, was designed precisely for this moment. If you examine the internal structure, you'll understand why conventional explosives wouldn't have worked. A standard bomb detonates on contact, creating localized damage at a single point. Against a 40-meter aircraft, you could destroy one section while leaving critical systems intact. Ukrainian security services needed to perform a lobotomy. The airburst warhead contains a central explosive charge surrounded by 2,000 cubic steel fragments, about 8 millimeters per side, packed in a polymer matrix. A radar altimeter in the nose transmits pulses downwards, measuring return time to calculate height. When the altimeter reads 6 meters, the fuse triggers, but the detonation is not spherical. The explosive is shaped charge. Curved surfaces direct the blast energy downwards, not outwards. Fragments accelerate into a focused cone towards whatever is below. Speed 1,800 meters per second. Time to cross 6 meters. 3 milliseconds. The impact pattern has a diameter of approximately 4 meters, with a fragment density of 40 impacts per square meter. The aircraft's aluminum skin offered no resistance. At 12:15 p.m. and 21 seconds, the warhead detonated. The cone of fragments struck slightly behind the intended aim point, over the wing root, rather than directly above the elant pod. Obstacle avoidance had shifted the impact area. It hardly mattered. The NV-9 pod sustained hundreds of direct impacts. Casing ruptured, antenna arrays shredded, processing units destroyed. The forward pressurized compartment containing the NV-4 mission computer was gone. The NV-4, the system's brain that fused radar tracks, MAD contacts, sonobuoy data, and electronic intercepts into a single picture capable of tracking 32 targets simultaneously, was destroyed in 3 milliseconds. A secondary impact struck the number 2 engine nacelle. Oil lines were severed, fuel lines ruptured, and a fire erupted within seconds. The IL-38N did not spectacularly explode. It simply ceased to be a functional aircraft. The Nala radar still existed, but nothing processed its returns. The Mad Boom was still deployed at the rear, but nothing read its data. The sonobuoy receivers still functioned, but nothing fused their inputs. The aircraft was not damaged. It was lobotomized.